Okay, we'll begin with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, today is March 24th, 2012. Okay, so today we're starting, I guess this is the spring semester. So a few days this week, it seemed very much like summer already. Are there any people who are new to the class who haven't come before? You've come before. You're Katie?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah. If you'd like to be informed of continuing classes, if you give your name and contact information. I don't see Kaiti here. Would Jason be staying? Or anyway, if you give to... Okay, Johnny will take it and give to Kaiti. So then each week you get informed when we're having the class. If there's a cancellation, you'll be informed. If we're having a picnic, you get informed. We haven't had a picnic yet. Okay, so this class has been going on now for on the Majjhima Nikaya for about 2 years. So we work through sutta after sutta, not every sutta, but selected suttas, and explore them in some detail. And so today we are taking sutta number 69, I believe. Yeah, this is called the Gulissāni Sutta. Sutta number 69. It's on page 572 of the book. And originally, when I made up the class schedule, I hadn't included this sutta, thinking it's very monastic in its emphasis. But then when I looked at it again, I thought that there's quite a lot of useful information here, not only for monastic people, but for any kind of Buddhist followers to read and to understand, because it shows certain, you could say, a certain pattern in the Buddha's teaching and certain points on which the Buddha places emphasis as a way of structuring the teaching so that one stage leads up to another stage, leads up to another stage. And also the sutta shows, well, it highlights, we call a number of values, ethical and social values, within the framework of the Buddha's teaching. Okay, so the sutta is named Gulissāni Sutta. It's named after the name of the monk around whom the sutta revolves. So the sutta begins when the Buddha was living in Rajagaha, in the bamboo grove. So the sutta is not spoken by the Buddha himself, but by the chief disciple Sāriputta. Okay, so the sutta begins when a monk named Gulissāna had come to Rajagaha. He had come out from the forest to Rajagaha and was staying together with the resident Sangha to take care of some personal business. You know, maybe he had to get his visa renewed, or... I mean, this is a situation that we face in Sri Lanka. You know, every once in a while, well, usually every year, I have to go to Colombo to get the visa renewed. Or maybe he needed some medical assistance, or had something to discuss with the other monks, or maybe he had relatives in Rajagaha who wanted to see him. And he's described as a forest dweller of lax behavior. And this phrase first it indicates something about the division that had already taken place to some extent in the Sangha during the Buddha's time. That is, a division started to emerge between what are called forest-dwelling monks and town-dwelling monks, village or town-dwelling monks. Perhaps in the Buddha's time, this division was still in a very, nascent or early stage. But in time, it would develop until today. We have a rather fixed distinction between monks in the Theravada countries, perhaps also in the Chinese-speaking countries, between town and village-dwelling monks, even city-dwelling monks, and forest-dwelling monks. And there are certain differences in the lifestyle. Okay, and this monk is described not only as a forest dweller, but as a forest dweller of lax behavior, of loose behavior, undisciplined behavior. And I took a brief look yesterday at there's a Chinese counterpart to this in the Madhyama Agama, number 26, and it gives a little fuller description of Gulissāni. It says that he was given to ridiculing and denigrating the other monks. He was excessively talkative. He was somewhat arrogant or conceited, and he had a mind like a monkey. So even though the Pali version just has lax behavior, so these phrases that occur in the Chinese counterpart elaborate some of the ways in which he was behaving loosely. Okay, and so Sāriputta must have been observing his loose behavior, and he wanted to speak to the monks about the proper way for a forest-dwelling monk to dwell. And so here he's speaking with reference. The sutta says that he addressed the other monks with reference to the monk Gulissāni. Okay, it says first, now I'm in paragraph 3, when a forest-dwelling monk comes to the Sangha and is living in the Sangha, in the midst of the Sangha, he should be respectful and differential towards his companions in the holy life. So you can see here that the Buddha, since Sāriputta here is really elaborating on the Buddha's own method of teaching. So what the Buddha emphasizes is very much at the very beginning developing the right kind of attitude, the kind of attitude that will guide one's behavior. And the attitude amongst members of the Sangha, the monastic Sangha, and even people, as well as between people living the household life, should be one of mutual respect. But especially in the monastic order, special respect is given to those monks who are elders, advanced in years, who have gained knowledge and experience. And so one should be respectful and differential towards them. One should treat them politely, show them the signs of respect. Generally within the monastic order, when a younger monk comes to a monastery, he'll go seek out the senior-most monk or several of the senior monks and pay respects to them. And they pay respect by bowing down to them. In American culture, the act of bowing down has some kind of big significance, as though you're treating the other person like a deity or a superman. But in Buddhist tradition, it's just a common, very ordinary sign of respect, and showing that one really is respecting not so much the person as an individual, but the qualities that that person embodies within himself through long years of training and discipline. Okay, and so now Sāriputta is now going to give sort of consequence of undisciplined behavior. So he says that if this forest-dwelling monk doesn't show respect and deference towards his companions in the holy life, his fellow monastics, there will be those who would say of him, "What has this venerable forest dweller gained by dwelling alone in the forest, doing as he likes, since he is disrespectful and undifferential towards his fellow monastics?" Okay, since there would be those who would say this of him, a forest-dwelling monk who has come to the Sangha and is living in the Sangha should be respectful and deferential towards his companions in the holy life. Okay, now this statement here shows that the Buddha places a certain amount of emphasis on the opinions that others hold about you. You know, sometimes we take the attitude or to a superficial understanding of Buddhism that we should just do what we think is proper and not care what other people think. In certain ways, that's right. You know, if other people are doing what is improper, what's wrong, and we have a very clear idea of what is right, proper, necessary, morally righteous, in that case, we should follow our intuition and not be concerned with the opinions of others. But when we know that others are living upright lives, that they are people of correct conduct, correct understanding, then their opinions matter. And so if one behaves, and one knows, of course, intuitively that one will be behaving in a reckless, inconsiderate way, then one should avoid that way, partly out of consideration for the views or the opinions of others. And for a monastic person, this has a special significance because people evaluate and make judgments upon the whole Buddhist monastic order and upon Buddhism itself on the basis of the opinion of its most visible representatives. You know, you might be a lay person, very diligent in your practice, very upright in your conduct, but when you're at an airport wearing just ordinary day-to-day clothes, people don't, look at you and say, "That one, he or she must be a Buddhist. How are they behaving?" But when we're wearing like robes like this, nowadays I don't notice theirs very much, but I think people are sort of, just taking one in, gobbling one up with their eyes, and if one, sits down in a rather sloppy way and just sprawls in one's seat, or starts singing and whistling to oneself, or if one is with a companion and one starts talking loudly and laughing boisterously, people will start thinking, especially if everybody else is sitting around absorbed in their laptops or talking softly to one another. If one starts talking loudly and boisterously, people are going to think, wow, these Buddhists are very inconsiderate of others. But if one behaves, walks with mindfulness and with self-composure, sits down quietly, carries on whatever one has to do with dignity, then people will get a favorable impression. And then they'll think that sometimes they might even get the impression that, wow, there really is something to this, the deportment of the Buddhists. In fact, in Chinese there's this expression, wei yi, which is usually translated, or often translated, the awe-inspiring deportment. So that the deportment of the Buddhist monastic should inspire respect and veneration from others. Okay, now when we speak about a forest-dwelling monk, often one thinks that the forest-dwelling monk this is especially in Buddhist tradition, the forest-dwelling monk is somebody special. Somebody who has gone to the forest in order to devote himself to full-time meditation. And people also sometimes they think when you become a monk, it means you immediately head off to the forest by yourself in order to apply yourself to full-time meditation. But here it's important to understand some aspects about the Buddha's way of establishing the training for a monastic. The Buddha laid down a principle in the Vinaya that during the first 5 years, even after the full ordination, a monk is supposed to stay under the guidance of a teacher. And normally when staying with the teacher, the monk will be living within a monastic community. And so he'll have the senior monk to turn to for instruction and guidance. He'll have other senior monks around who can give advice and set example. He'll be living together with other monks, and so he has to learn how to live and behave harmoniously within a group. Where the monastery is situated, where he's undergoing this period of training, this can vary depending on circumstances. It can be in a town or city. It can also be in a forest. There are in the Buddhist countries larger forest monasteries which might have 10, 15. In Sri Lanka they could have 10, 15, 20 monks. In Thailand I hear they could be even larger, even 30 or 40 monks in a forest monastery. But when you're living in a monastery together with other monks, one learns the proper procedures regarding seats, regarding taking the meals, regarding bathing times, regarding the times for communal gatherings. One gets a chance to learn the discipline from other monks. And it's when one completes this process of training, even doing one's practice together with other monks, is when one completes all of this that one is really well established for going off to dwell alone in a forest, where one has just a little hut, or maybe living in a cave in the forest, or sometimes a very small hermitage where there might be just 2 or 3 monks. In one sutta, the Buddha speaks of 5 reasons why monks go to live alone in the forest. And if you hear these 5 reasons, it might dispel illusions that you have about what it means to be a forest dweller. The text says, this is Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 5, Sutta 181. The text says that there are 5 reasons why monks go to live alone in the forest. One is that a monk is, dull and stupid. I don't know why they're dull and stupid. Maybe the monk can't get along in day-to-day life. He's just like the kind of person that everybody rejects as being worthless, useless, incompetent of learning anything. So he can't, when he comes to any monastery, all the other monks say, "You're a useless fellow, we won't accept you." So he has no other place to go, and so he'll go to live alone in the forest. Okay, the second reason is that the monk has evil desires, bad desires. That is because the forest monks are given a certain amount of veneration, regarded highly. He thinks that his motive is not really to develop himself, but he wants to be praised, to get offerings, and maybe do engage in mischievous activities from the depths of the forest. So he goes to live in the forest, and then when he comes into the town or village, people say, "Oh, where are you living?" He'll say, "Oh, I'm living deep in the forest with the tigers and other wild animals, wild elephants, the leopards and bears." And people will think, "Oh, our monk must be very holy since he's living there. Would you like some offerings? Can we do anything for you?" And then he'll say, "Well, I don't know, I don't have a good imagination for thinking of bad things. Setting up a gambling casino in town." Okay, the third reason is that the monk is mentally deranged. This seems a little similar to being dull and stupid, but I guess here the monk is actually out of his mind, so again he has no other place to stay, and so he just lives in the forest. Okay, so those are in a way 3 bad reasons for going to live in the forest. Next come 2 salutary reasons. So one of these is because the monk wants to follow the example of the Buddha and the great disciples. We know that the Buddha, when he was struggling for enlightenment, he went to live in the forest, and many of the great disciples, when they went through their period of intensive meditation, they would go to the forest to meditate. So this monk wants to follow their example by going to the forest. Then the 5th reason, which is apparently is considered the best, is for the sake of contentment, solitude, simplicity, and to eliminate defilements. So this is really the reason, the most proper reason for living in the forest. Because when one is living in the forest, one doesn't have any sources of distraction or entertainment, so one has to be content. One has a lot of time spending in solitude, so one has to know how to train the mind. Otherwise, the mind becomes restless, agitated, or just dull and drowsy. One learns to live very simply, to live with the bare minimum, because all one has is in the forest is usually just a little hut or a cave, one's robes, and one takes one's alms bowl, and every day one has to go walking to a village nearby to get food and come back. And pretty much that's all there is. You know, maybe nowadays with wireless internet, maybe a monk can have... In fact, I had a good friend who lived in a cave, a hillside cave. It was near a village. He managed to set up one of these, what do you call this? Satellite dishes. So he had a wireless connection for his computer, cell phone, wireless cell phone. I think that's it. But he was also a very well-disciplined meditative monk, but other activities that he had to use the cell phone and the computer. Okay, so that was a little excursion or digression. So the first point is that the forest monk should be respectful and differential towards his fellow monks. And this applies really to everybody within the within the Buddhist community, whether monks or lay people. Everybody should be respectful towards one another, deferential in the sense of being open to hear the opinions of others, to receive advice from others. And nobody should be arrogant, be carried away by a sense of self-importance, and ridicule, denigrate, and discourage others. Okay, second point. There's actually 17 points altogether. The second point, when the monk comes to the Sangha and is living in the Sangha, he should be skilled in good behavior regarding seats. This might seem something trivial, but we could see that there's a certain importance in this. And the reason is going to be explained in this elaboration. Or what is meant by good behavior regarding seats is explained in the elaboration. So one should be thinking, I shall sit down in such a way that I do not encroach upon elder monks and do not deny new monks a seat. Do not prevent younger monks from sitting down. Now the Buddha established a certain procedure for, say, showing deference and respect within the Sangha. And the procedure the Buddha laid down is not based on spiritual attainments at all. It's based very simply on seniority, the number of years one has been fully ordained as a monastic. And so when it comes to seats, for example, when there's a meeting of the Sangha, the seats might be laid down in a row. So the principle is that the senior-most monk will sit at what's considered the head seat. Sometimes that seat will be in the front of the assembly, so he's sitting in front. But then all the other monks will sit in seats which are in descending distance from the head of the assembly. And so it doesn't matter if a monk is very senior, but he's, a decent monk, but not a person of spiritual accomplishment, he'll still sit in the first seat. And if a monk is in Arhat, but he's just been newly ordained, he'll still sit in the last seat. And this is really determined so precisely by seniority that when a visiting monk, say, comes to a monastery, he'll sometimes announce what the year of his ordination is, or sometimes when he's going to a meeting and there are seats, he'll ask the other monks, how long have you been ordained, to find his proper seat, or they'll ask him. To give one account from my own experience, this was 2002, shortly after I came back to the U.S., I went to visit a Thai temple out in Chicago where a friend of mine was living. And during the first few days I was there, I think I was the second monk in seniority. There was the abbot, then I think I came second, and then there came two other monks who were junior to me. Okay, then after I was there about 3 days or so, another regular monk came back who had been out of away from the monastery. And I saw him early in the morning, and he looked fairly young. So when we came for the breakfast, again I sat down in the second seat. And then we had the meal. And then after the meal, I should have asked him before, it was my mistake. But he looked young. But somehow I asked him, when were you ordained? And he said, 1973. I thought, I'm 19, he looks young, but he's 73, I'm 73. Then I asked him, what month were you ordained? He said, May. I thought, I was ordained in May also. Then I asked him, what day were you ordained? And he wasn't supposed to remember this date. So he said, May 17th. I said, Venerable Sir, I apologize. Please take the second seat. Then I bowed down to him to show respects to him, because I was ordained on May 20th. However, my ordination teacher had originally scheduled my ordination for May 17th. But May 17th of that year was Vesak. I think his original idea was it would be nice to have the ordination on Vesak, but then he must have heard that there's going to be a lot of activity. Vesak is, the Buddha's birthday, Enlightenment Day. So he must have heard that there's going to be too much activity on Vesak, which I think it was a Thursday of that year. So then they must have decided to reschedule the ordination on the Sunday. I remember it was a Sunday, so that was May 20th. But if it was May 17th, and I asked that monk, if I was ordained May 17th, and he was ordained May 17th, I was ordained May 17th, I would have had to ask him, what time were you ordained? If he said sometime between 2 and 3 p.m., then we would have had to toss a coin, because I was ordained sometime between 2 and 3 p.m. But if he said the morning, then I would have had to say, "Venerable sir, please take the second seat." Okay, so this is the principle that when you sit down, you don't encroach upon the seats of the elder monks, by sitting in their seats. And also one should try to make room for younger monks to sit down. Usually there'll be some monks, if they're putting out mats like that, the monks will always try to arrange that there's a seat for every monk. If a new monk comes, then they'll open up a space. And so to put in a new cushion so that everybody gets a chance to sit down. Okay, but if this monk coming from the forest starts acting rudely, without asking, he just sits down in the senior seat, or he takes some kind of action to try to prevent the younger monks from getting their proper seat, that's considered improper behavior regarding seats. Okay, then the refrain is always phrased in the same way, it's just that the particular point of conduct is replaced. Okay, now we come to the next point, and it says that the forest-dwelling monk who comes to the Sangha should not enter the village too early, that's too early in the morning, and return too late in the day. If he does so, then there'll be people who will say, what has this forest-dwelling monk gained by living in the forest, doing as he likes, since he enters the village too early in the morning and returns too late in the day? Again, this regulation, or this guideline is laid down out of consideration for the opinions that people will form of the monks, and also to protect the monks themselves from what might be considered improper behavior. Because it's generally within the day-to-day life of the monastery, the monk will have a place to live within the monastery if there's the setup is such that the monks are supposed to go into the village or town on alms round, then there'll be the appropriate time when all of the monks go into the village or town for alms round and come back. If the monk has something to do early in the morning or late in the day, if he has a doctor's appointment, if some people want to see him to discuss some matter with him, if he has, in the case of a foreign monk in another country, he has to go get his visa renewed, of course then it's appropriate. But this regulation here, it's intended to regulate kind of random or loose behavior of just wandering about, leaving the temple, the monastery, just going very early into the village, hanging around, maybe chit-chatting with people, going into their shops, looking at what's there to buy, what are some things I could ask people to buy for me, maybe going into the, when they play the pool hall, chatting with the guys on the street corner, loose random behavior like that, so people will see and think, there's no real difference between the way these monks are behaving and the way we behave. And they'll get a low opinion of the Sangha, they'll complain to other people, and then all of the monks start to get the bad reputation of one monk will spread to other monks into the temple itself. And so one has to be careful to go into the village or town at the appropriate time. And if one goes, one is supposed to inform another monk who's staying in the monastery, I have to go into the village for such and such a reason, and I expect to be home at such and such a reason. So then it's considered legitimate to go. Okay, paragraph 6, we have, it's laid down that the forest-dwelling monk, when he comes to the Sangha and is living in the Sangha, he should not go before the meal or after the meal to visit families. And if he goes before the meal or after the meal to visit families, there will be those who say, what is this monk doing? Why is he behaving this way, doing as he likes? He must be used to making untimely visits, since he behaves thus when he has come to the Sangha. Okay, so this is a case where a monk, just for no good reason, he goes before the meal or after the meal to visit families. And the reason for this is laid down this is actually covered by a rule in the Patimokkha. And the reason for this rule is explained in the background story. And I'm not sure that the background story actually explains the full range of this rule. But the background story is that there was a family that supported a certain monk named Upananda. And they invited Upananda together with a group of monks to their house for a meal. And Upananda had gone early into the village to visit other families. And the other monks went to the house of the supporters who had offered the meal. But the supporters, the time was going by, and the other monks were saying, it's time to offer the food. But the supporters were saying, we prepare this meal especially out of regard for our venerable one, Upananda. We have to wait for him to come. We won't serve until he comes. And so time was going by, till it was getting close to the meal cutoff time of noon. Still, Upananda hadn't come. And then finally, probably about, if we had a clock, we would say about 11:45, 10 to 12, Upananda turns up. And so then the lay people say, okay, now we can offer the meal, and they offer. And then the monks all have to eat the food in a hurry to finish before the cutoff time. So then blame came to Upananda, and then the Buddha laid down this rule. But I think the rule actually has a wider application than just to specific situations like that. That it's just sort of not considered bad form for a monk just to go very casually, into the village, call on families very early in the morning, or just without being invited to come in the afternoon, at night, just maybe knocking on the door, ringing the bell, and saying, hi, can I come in for a chat? It would be considered not appropriate conduct. If, say, the family invites the monk to come, we have some matter to discuss with you, please come to see us. This is a convenient time for both. Then it would be all right in the morning or in the afternoon. But just coming regularly, dropping in at Joe's house this morning, coming to Mrs. Smith's apartment this afternoon, and then just chatting without any fixed purpose, beneficial purpose, would be considered not proper conduct. And so that seems to me a more general reason for this regulation. Maybe I should ask at this point whether there are any questions on any of the points that I've covered so far. Again, please always feel welcome to ask questions. Yes?
Is the supposition that this...
we have the mobile microphone.
Is it this...
I think, just speak a little. Yes. I'll repeat the question.
The supposition that Gulissāni did not get any of this training or understanding of the rules of behavior before he went off and became a...
Yeah, there's no explanation of the background to this. And I don't really remember what the commentary said to it. I would think... No, I think if he had gone out to the forest, he would have... It seems he should have gone through the training. But maybe he was just in a hurry to rush off to the forest, thinking maybe to get a reputation as, a forest-loving monk. Yeah, Val? Take the microphone.
Do these 17 points relate directly to the number of vows that the monks take, like 257 or 249?
You mean, do they relate to, are they all covered by specific, they're actually precepts, training rules? Not all of them, no. In paragraph 5, paragraph 6, those are covered by actual rules. Even in paragraph 3 and 4, those are concerned more with attitudes, so they're not covered by specific rules. Or maybe 4, is it covered by something in the Khandaka? I think it's mentioned in one of the sets of proper conduct in the Vinaya, but it's not one of the fixed rules of the Patimokkha. Then what comes after that is more part of inner training rather than the kind of training that can be governed by rules. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I've got to know.
You got to know.
I've got to know. A monk, when I think of other clerical type rabbis, priests, blah, blah, blah. If there's someone who's sick in the family and the monk wanted to stop by before the meal to, see how you're doing, or somebody passed away and wanted to stop in and console the family without an invitation, but just because he knows.
No, definitely, if there's a genuine reason, that would be quite legitimate for him to go. Yeah. In fact, normally what happens is if somebody falls sick and that person has a close relation with the temple, then members of the family will come to the temple and they'll inform the monks, and then they'll often, in modern times, of course, I'll give them a ride with a car to see the sick relative. And if when somebody who had been like a supporter of the temple passes away, then the relatives will come and inform the monks. So they'll come to the house. It's always in Sri Lanka, this is always a tradition. Okay, this is your chance. Everything you always wanted to know about monks' life, but were afraid to ask. And one thing, just sort of spinning off of Matt's question, we get a sense, this is like a frank disclosure, like when you've been a monk for a while and you meet another monk, just from observing sometimes the minutiae of the behavior, sometimes even just the mannerism, you get a sense whether the monk has been trained or not. Yeah. Excuse me?
That makes sense, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. In fact, something that I learned or picked up in Sri Lanka. Back in the 1980s, there used to be a tradition, I don't know whether this still continues, for older men who have gone through the lay life, with families, they want to get ordained, after the kids grow up, and then they get ordained, maybe when they're in their late 50s, 60s. I found, this isn't any kind of boasting, but just, I developed a sense when seeing, when you see an elder monk come out, you just arrive in a monastery, you don't know anybody in the monastery, an elder monk comes out. After a time, I got a sort of sixth sense. I was going to say a third sense, a sixth sense. Whether that elder monk, whether he's really been, ordained like 25, 30 years, or whether just, 1 or 2 years, it is, at the age of 58 or 62, ordained. Did you just say that? Why don't you get ordained?
Matt just came up with a cute word, Buddha. Radar.
I see. But I did make that a mistake once. There was this monk in Sri Lanka, his name was Venerable Chanda Vimala. He was like one of the most learned monks in Sri Lanka. He's written like in Venerable Rerukane Chanda Vimala? You know the name? He's written like all of the basic books in the singular language that all the Buddhists were reading, from the 1960s, 70s, 80s. He has like a book on Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, the silas or precepts of monks and lay people, on the 5 precepts, just about almost every topic in Buddhism, an Abhidharma, very, very learned monk. And I wanted to meet him, so I went to his monastery, and no monks were there. It was just a lay person there, and he said that all the monks had gone out for an alms offering. So I waited till they came back. And then this elder monk came out, and his manner just seemed so humble that I thought, he must be ordained, one of these recently ordained elder monks. So I asked him, is the Venerable Rerukane Chanda Vimala in? I'm Venerable Rerukane Chanda Vimala. And this was 1975. The end of 1975. And a remarkable thing about this Venerable Rerukane Chanda Vimala, he lived to be 100 years old. And he requested, when he's going through the death process, he asked his pupils to recite the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first discourse. And so when he knew he was dying, he informed his pupils, they came, they recited the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and while they were reciting, he passed away. And then it's a tradition in Sri Lanka when a prominent monk dies, the body is usually kept in state for a week, and often he gets a state funeral, and thousands of people come to pay respects. And Rerukane Chanda Vimala, he was one of the best-known monks in Sri Lanka because his books, thousands and thousands of people read his books. But he had made a request that when he died, he wanted his body to be cremated right away, the same day that he died. And that was done. So by the time all of the government ministers... Simplicity. He doesn't want, hundreds of thousands of rupees spent on his funeral ceremony. Okay, so we'll continue. Okay, so now we come... You see, this is part of the Buddha's way of training. We start with disciplining first the basic orientation, that is being respectful and deferential towards others. Then modes of conduct. These are concerned outward expressions of an inner discipline or outward expressions of this right attitude. Right conduct concerning seats, not going into the village too early, not going too early, visiting families at the improper times. Okay, but now we come to the inner training of attitudes. Actually, I have to say the order is doesn't fully conform to that order. Okay, but here in paragraph 7, the monk should not be haughty and personally vain. So he should be, again, this is being humble and simple in his demeanor, not being proud, thinking, I'm a forest monk, these are village-dwelling monks. I practice meditation maybe 12 hours a day. You look at these monks, they're just reciting texts, not maybe doing just 2 hours of meditation a day. I'm wearing these worn-out rag robes. These monks are wearing new robes. Recently I came across a person, he's not actually a monk, but he uses the internet, he's on these internet forums, and he's saying, if somebody criticizes any of his comments about meditation, he'll say, what does that person know about meditation? I've done 3 years of solitary retreat. I put in 6 hours of meditation a day. If this person wants to criticize my opinions about meditation, let's see his stats. How many hours a day is he putting in on the cushion? How many long retreats has he done? So one shouldn't be boastful, haughty, or personally vain. Okay, the next principle, one shouldn't be rough-tongued and loose-spoken. One should be, this is concerned with restraint in speech. So one should control one's speech so that one doesn't speak excessively, particularly if it's on secondary matters. And one should not speak roughly to other monks, but one should again always speak politely, considerately, courteously. And one should be sure that one is keeping whatever one is speaking about. One should speak about either things that pertain to Dhamma or else to, say, the things concerned with the running of the monastery or with maybe giving advice to people. But don't just engage in loose types of subjects of conversation. Some of the texts mention various types of what comes sometimes called animal talk, talking about, we have it Sutta number 77, I think. Actually, it's thought 76. Well, I could actually update it by saying, talking about sports events, talking about movie stars, talking about pop singers, talking about popular TV shows. There should be some control on talking about computers and programs, but that tends to be sometimes a subject of fascination amongst monastics. Okay, so don't be rough-tongued, but speak courteously, softly, gently, politely. Don't be loose-tongued, speaking randomly about inappropriate subjects. Okay, now we come paragraph 9. When the monk comes to the Sangha and so on, he should be easy to correct and should associate with good friends. Actually, we have here two things which I would really think should have been kept separate, because they're actually two quite important points. But the Buddha, in his method of training, always, or very often, he puts associating with good friends right at very close to the beginning, because we absorb the influences of those we associate with. So by good friends, it's meant, often it means, like in the monastic life, senior monks who are of good conduct, knowledgeable, upright, well-disciplined, well-established in their practice, who could give advice and guidance. Maybe this is where it connects with being easy to correct, because what is meant by this is that one should be amenable to advice and guidance from others. You know, there are two kinds of attitudes that people take in respect to advice, because our egos tend to be very sensitive, a little bit like the membrane of a cell, which if you pierce it with a needle, it breaks open. So very, very sensitive, the ego. So when somebody corrects us or gives us advice, we might react to that and think, how dare you correct me? If one does something really wrong and somebody rebukes you, then you think, how dare you criticize me or rebuke me? And then we think, I have to be right, the others are wrong. Then we start criticizing them in return, and we start defending ourselves. But the way of training that the Buddha lays down is to be easy to correct, to be amenable to correction. The word is used in Pali, very useful word. The prefix su can mean good, happy, or easy, and vacha signifies speech. So sometimes this is wrongly translated as being of good speech, being a good speaker, but that's not really the correct translation. It means rather being easy to speak to, in that one is willing to accept advice and guidance from others. It doesn't mean that the others are always right. It can be that you're doing something right, but others have misunderstood. In that case, you're entitled to defend what you're doing. But one shouldn't be defensive because of the sense of ego, self-pride, and one shouldn't respond with antagonism if others criticize one. And usually the way one receives good advice from others is by associating with kalyana mita, another important word, good spiritual friend. Okay, now with the next section, we really come into what we would call an ascending series of steps in the training. So these are the steps that deal with progressive stages where the training is becoming progressively more interior. So we start that the forest-dwelling monk should guard the doors of the sense faculties. So this is something that cannot be commanded by precepts or by rules, but this is a matter of self-training. To guard the senses so that they don't go wandering out, looking for enjoyable objects, delightful, pleasant objects to grasp onto. Because now we're preparing the mind for samadhi, for collecting the mind so that it can go into meditative absorption, concentration. And so one has to avoid letting the mind run outward through the senses, picking up on delightful, enjoyable sense objects, or reacting with irritation towards disagreeable objects. So guarding the doors of the sense faculties. Then next we come to being moderate in eating, since if one just eats excessively, then one gets stuffed, overly full, and then one is not able to develop strong concentration. Okay, then the forest-dwelling monk should be devoted to wakefulness. This means that one should be vigilant in the training. Again, this is referring to, especially to the training in meditation. Of course, one should get enough sleep so that one wakes up feeling refreshed. But when the forest-dwelling monk is in the forest practicing meditation, he should be wakeful throughout the day. And then 13 is closely related. He should be energetic, that is, applying energy and training the mind in order to eliminate the unwholesome states and to develop wholesome states. So this is really right effort. Then we come, paragraph 14, he should be well established in mindfulness. So this is really the right mindfulness factor of the Eightfold Path. And then that culminates in paragraph 15, he should be concentrated. That is, he should be able to gain samadhi. This is in a way a kind of ideal standard. It's not that any forest-dwelling monk is going to be skilled in samadhi, but one should be at least devoted to the practice of right effort and right mindfulness for the purpose of gaining samadhi. But if we go on the ideal standard, then the ideal forest dweller should be one who is able to achieve the jhanas or meditative absorptions. Okay, then comes paragraph 16. He should be wise. This is panyava. He should have panya. The word wise, it's a little bit misleading in English. It suggests, the sage of the countryside sitting on the porch with his pipe who could give wise advice to the school kids when they go by. But this is a more specific idea. It means that on the basis of samadhi or concentration, one develops insight into the real nature of phenomena. This especially means being able to see one's experience in terms of the 5 aggregates, and then to see the 5 aggregates as subject to the 3 characteristics of impermanence, dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, and anatta, non-self. So one first develops one's concentration, then through concentration one develops wisdom, and then based on the wisdom, based on the concentration, then one develops the wisdom or the insight into the 3 characteristics. Okay, paragraph 17 is a bit interesting. It says that a forest-dwelling monk should apply himself to what is translated here as the higher Dhamma and the higher discipline. The Pali terms, I'll write them. The Pali word Abhidhamma, the Pali words are Abhidhamma and Abhivinaya. And as some of you probably know, what's called Abhidhamma later became a quite specialized branch of Buddhist learning, which was concerned with the very precise, technical investigation, analysis, classification of all the types of phenomena that are mentioned in the Buddha's teaching. And so in time there evolved, in several early Buddhist traditions, vast collections of texts which came to be called the Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Abhidhamma that we have at present almost certainly didn't exist in the Buddha's time, but it seems that there might have been a branch of knowledge already taking place within the Sangha amongst those who specialized in sort of the more precise, detailed analysis and explanation of the teachings. I would suppose that this was the seed out of which the later Abhidhamma evolved. And there's no separate branch of learning called Abhivinaya, but if we look at the Vinaya is the Buddhist monastic discipline. And if one reads the Vinaya Pitaka, one sees that there's a lot of very precise analysis of the rules and regulations. So probably that is what is meant by Abhivinaya. So it's a more specialized, more technical understanding, on the one hand, of the Dhamma, or doctrinal teaching, on the other hand, of the discipline, the monastic discipline. And it seems to me it's a little excessive to expect a forest-dwelling monk necessarily to be able to have great knowledge in Abhidhamma or in the specializations of the Vinaya, because most forest monks that I've known will just usually they concentrate on the nucleus of teaching from the suttas and don't study too much extensively the doctrinal teaching. But maybe Sāriputta himself is regarded as sort of the father of the Abhidhamma, the one who was best known for his detailed analysis of the teaching. So maybe for this reason he mentions Abhidhamma and the details of the discipline. Okay, then, excuse me. Then in excuse me, getting a little phlegm in this throat. In paragraph 18, it said that the forest-dwelling monk should apply himself to those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial or formless, transcending forms. Now, what is meant by this expression are certain stages of meditation, stages of samadhi that go beyond the four jhanas. Though the word used here is liberations, it doesn't mean liberation in the sense of complete release from samsara, but it means, it refers to these higher stages of meditative absorption. And so beyond the four jhanas, there are four stages called the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And so Sāriputta is saying here that the forest-dwelling monk should apply himself to those attainments. But actually, if we look at most of the Buddha's discourses on the training, he doesn't place too much emphasis on the formless meditations. But usually what the Buddha emphasizes are the four jhanas, the lower 4 stages of meditative absorption. But the Buddha himself did practice the 4 formless meditations, and the Buddha did have disciples who were skilled in them, amongst them Sāriputta. And so we have the 4 formless absorptions, and beyond the formless absorption, there's another state called the cessation of perception and feeling. So ideally, a forest monk who's skilled in all the stages of meditation will also master these formless meditative attainments. Okay, then next comes, this is the last section in the sutta. The forest-dwelling monk should apply himself to what is called the superhuman state, or the superhuman attainment. And I'll read out the whole passage. There are those who ask a forest-dwelling monk a question on the superhuman state. So if, when he is asked, he fails to reply, there will be those who criticize him and say, "What is he doing, living alone in the forest, doing what he likes, since he does not even know the purpose for the sake of which he went forth?" Okay, now what is meant here, apparently, by the superhuman state would be, or this is my interpretation, would be the 4 stages of realization, or 4 stages of liberation. The stage of stream entry, by which one breaks through the first 3 fetters and is guaranteed of liberation after 7 more lives at most. The stage of once returner, whereby one comes back to this world only 1 more time and then gains liberation from samsara. The stage of non-returner, whereby one does not come back to this world, but one takes rebirth in another world and there attains liberation. And the stage of arhatship, by which one fully eradicates all the defilements and then gains complete liberation. So those would be the superhuman states, or the superhuman attainments. And so at least the passage makes something of a concession, so it says one should apply oneself to the superhuman state. It doesn't necessarily expect the forest-dwelling monk to have already achieved those states, though in the Buddha's time there would have been many who did achieve them. And at least one should have some idea of the purpose, why one is living in the forest, why one is engaged in this practice, so that if others ask one a question about one's motivation, what is the goal of the teaching, what is the marks of real attainment, one will be able to answer them. And of course, if one has reached one of these higher levels of realization and can speak from personal experience, then it's that much better. But at least Sāriputta says one should apply oneself to reaching the superhuman state. Okay, so that takes us through the 17 practices to be undertaken by the forest-dwelling monk. Then when Sāriputta finishes, then Venerable Moggallana asks him, should these things be undertaken and practiced only by the forest-dwelling monk, or should they also be undertaken by the monk who lives in a temple, a monastery near a village? And then Sāriputta said that these things should be undertaken. It seems to me that I would word it this way. This way makes better sense to me. These things should be undertaken and practiced even by one who dwells near a village. How much more then by the forest-dwelling monk? Because ordinarily one expects the forest-dwelling monk to have more time, more solitude, sort of better external conditions for these practices. Whereas the village-dwelling monk there'll be more activities at a village monastery, more invitations to come to the village for religious functions, to take alms in people's houses. So there'll be more claims on the village monk's time, But still, even though his time might be limited, he should make his best effort to apply himself to these factors of training. But the forest-dwelling monk who has so much more time, so much more leisure and solitude, should be even more diligent and committed to these practices. Okay, maybe this should take care of the basic presentation. And now, if there are any questions that arise from any of this, again, never feel any hesitation to ask, even if you think the question will be a little embarrassing to yourself or to me.
Yeah, in the notes you mentioned that you should apply yourself to one meditation subject, such as kasina. Could you explain kasina and...
the word kasina?
Yeah.
I can say that today.
Oh no, it's in the notes.
In the notes. Okay. Oh, I see. So this must be from the commentary.
Commentary 694.
Yeah. Okay, a kasina is a disc which can represent one of the primary elements or a color. What's usually used in a country in Sri Lanka would be the earth kasina. So they take a kind of rim and they connect it so it forms a circle, and then they'll fill it with clay, which the clay represents the earth, and they'll put it in front of them a certain distance.
It's an object that you meditate on.
Yeah, and one focuses on it just to concentrate the mind on earth, or it could be a colored disc.
Like a mantra, more or less.
Yeah, except the mantra is a verbal formula, and this is something to be visualized.
Okay.
The disc could be colored, just all blue, all red, all white, all yellow. Okay. No one just focuses upon that, and it just helps. The purpose is to build up concentration with samadhi. Yeah, Katie?
If this is too excursionary, please let's pass on the question. But since jhana was brought up today, and I've read in Venerable Analayo's book, he cites in the Sāriputta Sutta that even first jhana is adequate for sotapanna, and I think that can be very encouraging to practitioners. Could you explain Vitakka and Vicara?
Vitakka and Vichara.
Vitakka and Vichara, if that's relevant to the basis in light of the jhana references.
Yeah, I don't think I should explain that now. It's a little bit too much of an excursion to explain Vitakka and Vichara, because those are jhana factors. I'm just trying to see if we have a jhana talk coming, the jhana sutta coming up. It looks like there'll be some time before we get back. But you should be able to find where we have this DVDs and CDs. There'll be the DVD of the talks that I gave on the book In the Buddha's Words, or even the Majjhima Nikaya talks, the talks on Sutta number 27 in the Majjhima Nikaya. There I have a very detailed analysis of the jhanas and the jhana factors. You'll find 2 discs, one is blue. Anybody can go there and take them. They should be up in the Buddha Hall, which might be closed now, or downstairs there's a place where you could pick up discs. The blue disc is on in the Buddha's Words, the brown disc is on the Majjhima Nikaya. And you'll find talks on the jhanas and those. Okay, please, Barbara.
Do we know if Gulissāni was actually present for this? Or,
yeah, it's a good question.
The reason I ask is that I remain a little troubled that all of this is directed towards what people would think of you.
Yeah, this is the important point that I wanted to make at the beginning. That it is, important. But maybe did you have something further to say then? Usually we think that we shouldn't be concerned with what other people say about us. But the Buddha actually uses the point that we have a certain maybe intrinsic sense of pride or dignity that should be drawn upon and used as a guide to our own training. That if we see that something is right, then we should follow that no matter what people say. But once we see that something is right and we're determined to follow it, then it's important, and we are in the vicinity of people who do have good standards of conduct, we should be concerned about their opinion, because especially for a monastic person, or a person who's known to be a Buddhist, that our conduct reflects back on our religion. So people will judge Buddhism by the conduct of its representatives. We have this problem that has taken place in American Buddhism from time to time. When sometimes it happens with certain people who are called Zen masters, or sometimes some Tibetan lamas, they're found to be having sexual affairs with their students. Then it spreads, usually Buddhism doesn't get any attention in the mainstream media, but something like this happens, and the New York Times has it, Time Magazine has it, trouble in Nirvana land, you get headlines like this. And then you have somebody in the South who reads maybe Time Magazine, or in the Midwest, who's never had any direct contact with Buddhists themselves, and they think, all Buddhists must be like that. Any further questions?
This is not a question.
Okay. Or any comments? Comments are also welcome.
Hi. This is not directly related to the class today, but in yesterday's New York Times, it is related very much to Buddhism. In yesterday's New York Times, I don't know if anybody saw an article on the first page about a nun who set herself on fire.
Oh, in Tibet.
In Tibet.
Yeah.
And I happened to have been in Lhasa in October,
right, yeah.
and met a number of these people, and they feel like their ability to express their Tibetan culture, to speak their language, to be taught their language is very much curtailed.
Yeah.
And there are soldiers in Lhasa all over.
Oh yeah, that I know. Yeah.
And it's not a scary place, but they are affecting the monasteries.
Yeah.
And I just thought people might want to be aware of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we'll have to stop now for the lunch break, and then we'll come back after lunch, and we could have some further discussion about the sutta after lunch. I think because today, it's still officially the winter season for the monastery, so the monastery hasn't prepared the lunch, but I think they might have, for those who didn't bring lunch, the boxes of the noodles that you just add the water and flavoring to. Okay, so we end by sharing the merits. I'll recite verses of sharing the merits with the Devas, Bhutas, Nagas. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyanta anumoditva chiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyanta anumoditva chiram rakantu desanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyanta anumoditva chiram rakantu mam param. Etavatatam ehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanuvodantu sabba sampati siddhya Sabbe bhutanumodhantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe satanumodhantu sabba sampati siddhya Pavagupadaya vichitato etantare satakayupapanna rupi arupi cha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu vibhutim. Okay, so we'll come back about 10 after 12 and then have about half an hour of discussion. Okay, we end with three half bows to the Buddha.
Bow to Bande.